everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the importance of improving animal welfare in order to prevent future pandemics. Certainly a topic that I find most interesting and appealing, and at a time when we're in the midst of COVID-19, it couldn't be more timely. My name is Emily Doolin, and I'm the Executive Director for Brook USA. I will not be able to participate in the seminar today. I have a prior engagement, but I wanted to share with everybody this nagging concern that I have had since the beginning of the pandemic. You know, as all of us enjoyed the comforts of the developed world during this pandemic, and what that means to me is we have the ability to quarantine, we have our food delivered to our homes, we work from home, we have top-notch healthcare, and we're receiving government subsidies. Not a discussion of if they're great or not, but we are receiving government subsidies. I have been thinking of the billions, and I say billions with a B, of people all over the world, in the developing world specifically, who cannot quarantine because they must go to market every day to sell produce to make money. They must go to the river to pick up water, to give water to their families and to their animals. Let's not talk about healthcare because there is none for many of them. And if they abided by the precautions that we are taking in the developed world right now, they would probably go hungry. So that kind of information is the one that we are so concerned about at Brook USA. It is the future of the countries that we fund through the great programs that Brook, our sister organization, puts together. So just that's my little thought for today. And it really nags me every single night before I go to bed, is to think about what is happening in the rest of the world and how fortunate we really are to live where we live today. With that said, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. I know that you will find this information interesting and thought-provoking. But more than that, I want you to pass this information on to everybody you know, because the more informed we are, the better we are able to fight future pandemics. So please pass this information on. And if you're not a friend or supporter of Brook USA, I hope that as of today, you will join our family. Trust me, we always have interesting and fun programs going on. So please join us if you're not already on our database or on our mailing list. So with that said, I would like to pass this on to Amanda Miller. She's our Major Gifts Officer. She will make the speaker introductions, and she will provide all the information that you need on housekeeping and all the rules that you need to follow today, which are few. Anyway, thank you for joining us today in our webinar. And again, thank you. Amanda, it's all yours, and I will see you later and listen to you from the car.
All right, thank you, Emily. As Emily said, I'm Amanda. I'm the Major Gifts Officer for Brook USA, and we're so happy to join us today. As Emily mentioned, the webinar is going to be very interesting as we talk about the role of animal welfare in our current and I guess potentially future pandemics. The relationship between animals and people are so deeply intertwined, especially what we see at Brook and Brook USA. So we'll get to hear a lot about that today. As most or all of you know, we are dedicated to improving the welfare of working equines, working horses, donkeys, and mules, and the people who depend on them to survive. We do this by granting funds to Brook and other organizations with similar missions. I'd also like to introduce my fellow co-workers here. We have Kendall Beer, our Development Officer, Donor Relations, and Bobby Sutton, who is our Finance and Administration Officer. We also have a couple board members on today. We have Catherine Caneb and Julie Wilson, and we are thrilled to have such good representation from folks who work through this every day. So before we get started, I have a couple quick housekeeping points. We've covered this a little bit, but all of you are muted, all of you are off video. I am not looking at any of you, and I cannot hear any of you. So don't worry about if your dog starts barking or anything. You are all muted, all off video. The only people you're going to hear speaking today are the people currently on your screen, Clara, David, and myself, and Emily. So we are recording this webinar. We'll email you the recording. You are welcome to share it. We encourage you to share it. So just pass it on to anyone who you think may enjoy it. In addition, we want to hear from you, and we would love to answer any questions that you may have. Since you are all muted, please type your questions into the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. There's also a Q&A box. I will be attempting to monitor that, but the chat box is easier. So please type your questions into the chat box. You can select who they go to. I recommend all panelists. That way, Clara, David, and I can all see them. Did I forget something? Oh, just that I will be monitoring, and I will be questions in where there is a lull in the conversation. Not that there will be many lulls, but I will make sure to get them answered. I'd like to introduce our main event now, which is Dr. Jones. Dr. David Jones is the founding board and chairman emeritus of Brook USA, and Dr. Clara Saville is I said that wrong, I know I did, is the head of animal health, welfare, and community development for Brook. So David and Clara, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Hello, Mike from North Carolina. I see you.
Okay, are we ready to go?
I think so.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is, as both Amanda and Emily have said, a very highly topical subject right now. There's a lot of misinformation about it, and I hope we can clarify, put some proper, accurate information in front of you today. Clearly, the present interest is in COVID-19, and we're going to talk a bit about that and some of the related diseases, related viruses to COVID and what they do, but also take a rather broad look at the whole transmission of diseases from animals to man. And just keep in mind, there are some diseases that go back from man to animals as well, and we might touch on those as well. It's reckoned that about 60% of all known human diseases that is caused by pathogens, bacteria, viruses, and so on, originated in animals, and they are intertransmissible in some form. There's a lot of work, we'll talk about that a bit, there's a lot of work going on at the moment looking at what's called emerging disease, and probably it's a lot more than 60% that we're going to find as research gets deeper and deeper into this topic. We're going to find that there's a lot more transmissibility between disease between animals and people. Now, before I go any further, I just don't be scared by all of this. I suspect after about 10 minutes, you're either going to want to tune out or think that life is going to end in about a week's time. It won't. We're a remarkably resilient species. So in fact, we can cope with much of this, but obviously we need to be much more aware about it. The relevance to Brook, we're going to go a little bit broader than Brook's interest, but we're going to talk a bit about why this is of relevance to Brook as well. Brook across the world, as Brook UK and Brook USA and other affiliates, are dealing with, dealing is the wrong word in a way, but are partnering with the poorest communities in the world. There are about 8 billion people on Earth, and about 1 billion, at least 1 billion, live well below the sort of poverty line that we would understand as poverty. And those are the people that Brook is dealing with every day. And they are the people who are also dependent on their livestock, whatever form of livestock that may be. And so there is a much greater transmission possibility from animals that they're in close contact with than would be the case as you would be familiar with when you're going to a petting zoo or a farm or something like that. And we're going to touch on some of those conditions in a minute. Anyway, enough for me for the moment. We're going to talk initially about human changes to the environment. This is a controversial subject. I think most people now are aware that humans are causing changes to the environment, and those changes are leading to greater possibilities of disease transmission. So, Clara, what about you kicking off with some thoughts on that topic? Is nature thriving or is nature in decline?
I think that's a fantastic question to ask, because we can only thrive if nature is thriving, David. And we know that there is this inextricable link between human activity, deforestation, and then the impact that it has on our lives, potentially increasing the chances of another pandemic. So we know that there's a link between increased consumption of meat and the deforestation required, but not only to set up those livestock farms, but also to farm the crops that are required to feed them. And this is
the link of that. I think a lot of people don't understand the link between deforestation and livestock farming.
Sure thing, yes. So in order to fuel this increasing consumption of meat across the world, but I would say predominantly in Western countries, there is then a greater pressure to cut down the forest for grazing cattle predominantly, and quite a lot of this happens in South America. But also those cattle need a lot of crops and input. So, for example, soya to feed them, because the efficiency of producing meat is so low, and so that also puts greater pressure on the environment. But you've also done a lot of work on this, David, and can probably expand on that.
Well, because there are many changes going on in the environment. It's partially human population increase, but it's two other factors really in relation to the difference in the economic situation of humans. I mean, obviously it's a gradation from the very wealthy to the very poor. Now, the very wealthy make demands on the environment in the sort of ways that you're talking about, both through their food, both through recreation, both through just wanting material things, all of which have an impact on nature. And at the other end, you've got folks, very poor folks, who are not even in the monetary economy. These are not people who don't even look at a banknote or a coin. They're very dependent on the sort of exchange economy and very much on self-sufficiency. They don't have funds to spend on extras. And so they also are putting a lot of stress on the environment. And you can imagine what's going on now in this whole COVID situation, that for many of these very poor communities who may have depended, if you take, for example, tourism in Africa right now, tourism is dead in Africa. There are countries like Kenya, Tanzania, whose about a third of their national income comes from Western tourism and employ millions, literally. It's over 1 million people in Kenya in the tourist industry. So you can imagine the pressure that they feel just to simply feed their families. Now, you must be seeing this a bit too in the Brook fieldwork. I mean, you're very familiar with what's happening around the world with Brook situations right now, and you're probably seeing something similar.
Yes, many of the communities that we work with, as Emily and yourself have highlighted, are at the lowest level of that spectrum, and already living hand to mouth, and so this has come as a real blow. And of course that has an impact on their animals if their livelihood has been destroyed and they can't afford to keep or feed them, yet still depend on them. So there's been a really impressive pivot of my international colleagues all across the world to still continue to work with our communities and support them. We've even continued to teach and mentor the vets through this, all remotely, and we're supporting them by linking them up to the government schemes that are available, supporting them with clear information about how to protect their own health, and also where there is a real emergency, working to help them source food and water for their animals where that is really required. So yes, there's been an impressive transition to support communities where we can. and they've
Yeah.
really appreciated that. I was on a call yesterday with my colleagues from India and Pakistan, and they said the communities have been really grateful for that ongoing support. Brooke did not abandon them in this emergency.
Yeah. We'll come back in a minute to sort of food and water particularly, and how they're impacted by a number of change. Climate change, for example, is something that we just need to touch on, because it combines in a way with these infectious disease issues, whether it's COVID or something else, to create tremendous pressures for some of these populations. But just talking about direct transmission from animals to people, do you see that a lot in our brook communities?
Well, we know that animals in a poor state of welfare have a diminished immune system and are more likely to become ill and transmit disease. There are zoonotic diseases in horses, although thankfully these are fairly rare. So directly from the horses and donkeys, not quite so much, but across the livestock and other animal spectrum, of course, rabies, thankfully it's predominantly been eradicated in Western Europe and in North America, but it is a huge problem in the kind of countries that we're working in. And so that is an ongoing issue. And then from other livestock, there aren't the vets that are monitoring the health of the meat and milk going into the food system, and so diseases can be transmitted through that means as well. And so there's sort of a chronic underlying disease transmission from animals to humans on a continuous basis. Thankfully, most of them don't then transmit from human to human in the way that this pandemic has. Of course, there's always the potential that could happen, but there just aren't the same animal health systems and the veterinary public health, like vets at abattoirs and milk processing units, and vets aren't able to treat and vaccinate against diseases in the same way that we experience. So yes, that can be a real issue.
You know, I think it's worth stressing that we're really dealing with two sort of disease transmission types here. Mm-hmm. You're looking at one which most people are quite familiar with. So your child picks up E. coli from infected lettuce, or handling a goat in a kiddie's farm, something like that. That's a direct transmission, but it usually ends. You're not having the kiddies may transmit it to another child, but it's a limited issue. It doesn't go too far. What we're dealing now with COVID-19, and what's so, the word interesting perhaps is the wrong word, but what's so worrying about it is that this is a virus which has certainly come originally from an animal source to humans. We don't quite know what happened there, but then gets to a point, it's evolved so far that it can be transmitted from human to human. If it's animal to human and it's a dead end, that's one thing. If it's animal to human and then humans become transmitting to each other, that's what.
And back to animals, of course.
And back to animals. Yeah, I think they've now discovered that over 100 animal species can actually be infected with the virus of COVID-19. Very, very few of them show any symptoms. But the worrying thing about that, of course, is that the viruses like COVID-19, it's coronaviruses are common, the common cold and different types of flu, and this one are all coronaviruses. And one of the common characteristics of coronaviruses is that they change very readily, and the mechanism of change is not fully understood. So the worry now and for the future is that more of these viruses will emerge from animal populations, combine probably with a human coronavirus, and gradually evolve to become resident, if you like, in the human population. And that's the, and I come back to that point that there are two. There's transmission, which is a dead end, and transmission, which is then passed from human to human.
So this has been an incredibly successful virus.
Absolutely, and of course, what's happening? Most people are familiar, of course, with the related flu viruses. This is not a flu virus as such, but the flu viruses can, in fact, we have many human mini pandemics, if you like, have come from mostly poultry and pigs.
Yes.
And pigs and poultry, birds generally, poultry being one of many species of birds that can be infected, mostly waterfowl, and very often migrating waterfowl are infected by strains of avian flu. And again,
so is that,
sorry, yeah, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, is that an impact, do you think, of factory farming and having lots of genetically similar animals all kept very close together in confinement? So
yeah, and that leads very nicely, of course, into this whole topic of wet markets, live animal markets, where it's thought the transmission of this new virus has come from. And it has been proven that a similar virus, SARS, S-A-R-S, also came from an animal market. But you can trace now nearly all these viruses back to bats. Now, please, everybody, don't go out and kill the next bat you see. Most of our bats in North America are very harmless. And of course, most animals generally can carry pathogens that are of no concern to us at all. And many of the viruses that they carry are of no concern to us. But what it looks like here, and obviously there's going to be an awful lot more research. I can see all the virology departments in veterinary schools gearing up to deal with this, to look at it in more detail. What we're going to find, I think, is that the virus, the COVID virus, almost certainly came from bats originally, probably wild bats, passed through another species. It's widely called, it's widely thought pangolins, Asian and African pangolins, just scaly anteater, small scaly anteaters, which are widely sold, sadly, in Asian markets for their so-called medicinal effects. And so it's probable that this virus transmitted through another species and then infected people, humans, closely associated with those markets. Now, these are not farmers' markets as we would generally know them, well-organized sort of veggie stands. These are horrible, slum-like, narrow passageways, almost entirely in Asia. There are some similar ones in Africa as well, but one or two in Latin America, but really, really dirty, dusty, often wet slum situations with narrow, closed-in streets, with everything from sort of fish in barrels to live animals, cats, dogs, civets, other wild animals, you name it, in cages, in close association with people.
Yeah, all come together and in really poor welfare conditions, and that have been transported long distances as well.
Yes, anything really which puts an animal under stress. So if you've got an animal being sold in a market that's been in a cage, you know, only twice its own size for maybe weeks on end, if it survives at all, then obviously that animal is under severe stress, and under stress it will produce more virus, which then becomes, you know, infected for people. But we're going to see a lot more. We're going to see a lot more research on this in the coming years.
So, do you think that all of these animal markets should be completely banned?
I don't think there's much choice for the moment. The main issue are Chinese markets, but we also find them in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. Most of Southeast Asia have them.
Yeah, and as you say, in Africa as well, West Africa, there are a lot of similar markets. But millions of people are dependent on these markets for food.
Absolutely, and that's going to be the big controversy, because whereas a country like China can more or less, under military rule, can more or less shut down these markets, and that probably they have actually done so on a temporary basis. Now the problem is whether The real question is whether they can continue or at least move to some form of cleanup and regulation that allows that allows them to be conducted in a manner that won't transmit disease.
That's what many experts are suggesting, that it's actually about better regulation and building those systems that can identify poor disease and improve animal welfare, if not completely stop live animals being involved. But yeah, certainly picking up disease at the source rather than once it has spread throughout humans.
Yeah, and the problem is, of course, that this is closely allied to the illegal wildlife trade. After guns and drugs, the wildlife trade is the most valued, if you want to put that word on it, valued trade in the world today. It's something around 30 to 40 billion dollars. So it's everything from rhino horn and elephant ivory right down to the sort of things we're talking about, live trade in pangolin. So not only are we talking about disease issues here, we're talking about very, very considerable conservation issues as well. So of course, closing these markets or regulating them carefully would actually have a very beneficial effect on trade in both animal parts and in live animals. Very critical.
So what would those regulations look like? I don't mean to jump in and interrupt, but as we're talking about better regulation for animal welfare in the wet markets, what sort of regulations are we talking about?
So it actually links to some work that we have been doing on strengthening animal health systems, and within most Western contexts, there are actually veterinarians involved at that point at which animals go into the human food chain and play a really important role, not only in maintaining animal welfare, so for example at slaughterhouses and abattoirs, in ensuring that animals have good welfare, but also identifying, post-mortem examinations will be carried out by the veterinarians, and laboratory tests will be conducted to ensure that there aren't zoonotic pathogens going into the food chain. In many of these informal settings, that simply doesn't exist at all. So this is sort of one part of the animal health system strength we want to work on, which of course for our purposes is to improve animal health and welfare, but COVID-19 has really shone a spotlight on the deficiencies in these systems.
From a Brook perspective, we're dealing with, it's 11 countries, isn't it, at the moment? Is it 11 or more than 11?
I believe so. I think we've worked through partners or otherwise in more than 16 countries in total across the world.
And as we said earlier, these are all highly impoverished communities. So have you already seen COVID impacts on these communities? Have they been more badly affected by this than they would have been, say, a year ago, in general?
Yes, certainly. As you've described, incomes sort of coming to a halt, or people just having to continue to work and put their health at risk because they have to, living hand to mouth. At present, the numbers are lower than that which we're experiencing here in the UK and in the US, but they're going up, and they're going up quickly. In India, the increase in the number of cases is terrifying, and those are only the ones that they're actually managing to test for. So there's a lot of underground cases that aren't even being registered, and we can see that is going to be happening across Africa as well. They're looking at peaks in Africa, in Ethiopia, for example, around about November.
Wow.
Yeah, and Ethiopia and Nigeria in Africa are the key hotspot countries probably for COVID and from a number of other diseases too.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry. Go on, no, you go.
I was just going to highlight that, of course, this COVID-19 in Africa and other Asian countries as well is layered on top of an ongoing burden of infectious disease, such as malaria and HIV.
And not to make everybody even more miserable, I was just going to throw in the climate change part of this at the moment and go back to the where you raised the question of food and water security. So we're looking, with any form of highly transmissible disease, you've got one pressure on human populations, impoverished human populations especially. And on top of that, now you've got climate change, which has and will increase the impact on water sources and on food production. So what increasing heat will do, or increasing weather disturbance will do, is in changing weather patterns, is going to make a lot more countries water short. I think we have something like 20 countries globally now that cannot actually guarantee the supply of water on a year-by-year basis. And that is going to increase substantially as the world warms. So, and these sort of people that Brooke are dealing with are the very sort of people that find it difficult to get water. I know we've done a lot in this direction, but of course what we're finding is we still have women in particular walking 10 kilometers, 7 miles a day to fetch a couple of pails of water. And this then has an indirect impact on food production as well, and whether crop species that they are dependent on now are going to be growing in those same places in 50 years' time, or even in 10 years' time. You've got these multiple pressures.
Yes.
Do you think people are getting more aware of all this?
One would hope so. Yes, this vital link that we have with the natural world, it's so important that we preserve it.
Yeah, I think what's happening is people are so tied up at the moment with the immediate concerns that the answer to are they more aware is probably no right now. But I think what we're going to see as we come out of this, or at least learn to deal with it, is we're going to see an awful lot more publicity about it, publicity about not only disease transmission, but also about the environment generally and the way in which we have to take much more care of the environment for our own sakes and certainly for all species.
And this is certainly something that we hope that there will be a real reflection of this and the risks. And as I say, people able to identify the root cause and not that it elicits a fear of animals, it's that we need to take better care of their health and welfare as part of that. So we're trying to bring together at this time a real broad coalition across several animal health and welfare organisations. Brooke is taking the lead on this to highlight the further investment that's needed in animal health systems. So that's all of the parts that results in the vets being able to do their job and have the right medicines and have enough vets across the world. So it's really highlighting we need a bigger and stronger workforce, really well-trained vets and paravets, who are the vet technicians out there. They need to have the essential medicines and vaccines. There are many that really don't have that at their fingertips at the moment. And we need to improve the surveillance and disease reporting at every point along the chain. And that's not only for human health, of course, but our real mission to improve animal health and welfare in and of itself. So we're hoping to launch a campaign called Action for Animal Health very soon. This is hot off the press because we're really only just over the last few weeks have really started bringing this coalition together. So we're really looking at that bigger picture because we recognise that a good animal health and welfare system will improve things in the long run for horses and donkeys that don't receive the care that they need currently.
Well, it's very tempting to get into the politics of all this, but the reality is, what we hope will happen, of course, is that political leadership will understand that all these topics, you know, whether it's climate change, whether it's new infections, should take much more high priority in terms of funding. That they've been, and this is part of the problem that we've faced, of course, both in Europe and here in America, where there's been completely inadequate funding of animal health and the future of animal health. Amanda, have we got any questions?
We do. We have a question that just came through asking what we can do as individuals. I know that we're talking quite a bit about the need to improve welfare, the need to make changes. And so what can we, as we're sitting here listening to all of them, what sort of things can we do?
Clara, go for it.
Well, as individuals, you do have a lot of power as consumers predominantly. And it's about making those informed choices about where your food comes from, thinking about animal welfare and also the impact on the planet and to ensure that it isn't contributing to deforestation and destruction, and ultimately reducing the amount of meat that we consume, but paying more for it to ensure it comes from a good source. And ultimately also through supporting Brook, through Brook USA and subsequently through the work that we do as an international organisation to support this real drive to improve animal health and welfare worldwide. From the work that we do directly in the field, we mentor over 4,000 vets and paravets globally, as well as working with fantastic people in communities across the world to improve the welfare of their animals, but also, as I say, at this higher level, at that lobbying and advocacy level, so that we can change the rules of the game and increase funding to improve animal health and welfare.
Yeah, and I think there's
three tiers going there: what we can do at home, how we can support with financial support, and then how we can support at a more high level with our advocacy and lobbying wherever we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two things I think on top of what Clara has said. One is just be informed, get informed. There's so much misinformation going around. It amazes me the number of highly intelligent people who still don't really understand what's happening with COVID, and they certainly don't understand what's happening with climate change. So, the more one can get informed accurately and pass that on, particularly to our kids, is really, really critical. And the other, which comes back to the point about where do our politicians put their money, is that we need to put much more emphasis on looking at and supporting not only the work of Brook, obviously that's a private concern, but also supporting Brook and others from governments. We're seeing a time when there's a tendency to pull back from supporting nations in Africa and Asia. There's never been a more important time to actually increase support for these countries.
Because we're all so interlinked.
Yeah.
We just got several questions together about this idea of advocacy and legislation. So I'm going to try to combine them all together into how do we advocate? Should we try to let our legislators know about what Brook and Brook USA are doing? And what's the best way to approach the idea of advocacy and our legislators?
Clara, Brook UK, of course, has started doing quite a lot on the advocacy line, haven't they? I mean,
and Brook USA is just starting as well.
Yeah, a very good example, of course, is Kenya and the donkey hide trade, for one.
Yeah.
Do you want to just comment on that?
Yes, I was going to say that we've been working a lot on the donkey skin trade. For those who aren't aware, There's a real market in China for a product called Ijiao, which is used for health and beauty, but with unproven benefits, that's made from donkey skins. And so it's really decimating the donkey population across Africa with abhorrent welfare practices in the transport and slaughter of those animals. And so we've really raised a huge campaign, which it is actually predominantly uses community voices to support them to advocate and lobby the Kenyan government themselves. It led to a ban in donkey slaughter, but unfortunately we just heard in the last couple of days that through intense lobbying on their part, the slaughterhouses have actually revoked that ban. So we need to redouble our efforts in that. And we're currently running a campaign for people in the UK to be able to lobby against our government to support that. But on a broader level, you have a lot of power in social media as well. And so by supporting and spreading, if you follow Brook and other animal welfare organisations and can really share that voice, that can be really powerful, as well as, of course, writing to your representatives who can take up these causes.
And in the US, I can say that Brook USA is about to be, we're about to be launching some new efforts. I would say within probably the next month or two, we're going to be coming out with an advocacy plan as well. Because the way it works in the US is somewhat similar and somewhat different from what happens in the UK. So we will be launching one that will address a number of these ways that you can contact, and particularly is concerned with the donkey trade, which, as Clara was just saying, is devastating people all over, particularly Kenya. So I know Catherine and Emily are both listening, so if either of them has any more details on the advocacy plan that's being worked on, I'm happy to share them, or hold tight for about a month and you'll hear a little bit more from us on that. We have another question that has come through, which is, can you comment on the availability of COVID-19 testing in the regions where Brook is working? Do you think that death counts are a more accurate measure of disease impact?
Clara?
I mean, that's a good question. If I can use a comparison, last year there was a huge outbreak of equine influenza across West Africa. And we know that at least 1 million animals, predominantly donkeys, died, or that's our estimate. But the real figures were much smaller than that. And in some countries, they weren't even diagnosing it at all. And so my colleagues working in West Africa went to the laboratories and asked them, can we diagnose this, because we need to alert the authorities so that we can tackle this. And they said, oh, we haven't tested for it because we don't have the reagents, the chemicals that you need, or the actual tests. And so these were national laboratories, which for animal diseases didn't have any of the chemicals or the expertise to even conduct those tests at all, let alone do enough. And so we know from our experience in animal health that capacity really isn't there. And so I suspect it's a similar picture for human health. And again, I mean, there's been chronic underinvestment in animal health systems, but there's a similar case for human health systems. And it plays to your point about we need to, in the richer nations, we need to support our fellow communities really to enable them to tackle this disease as well, because it's a global problem.
Yeah. You know, one of the, just coming back on a broader advocacy side, one of the great successes of Brook over the years, and I've been with Brook for 50 years, almost to the month, in one form or another. And one of the great successes, which we were very nervous about handling, you know, in the early days, in my early days of Brook, was this whole question of advocacy. But where Brooke has made enormous strides in recent years is this whole question of getting straight to government, getting to central government, getting to regional governments, working with them on the wider issues. And if you don't do that, you can tackle a small village, a little community, but unless you present these topics to the larger community, it might be a state, it might be a county, it might be a whole country, you're not going to have the same impact. And Brooke has been very successful at doing that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's
USA, as we get ready to launch our advocacy, we're sort of standing on the shoulders of giants who have been here before. We're just bringing it to the US.
Different audience. Yeah.
It's nice to be able to look back and see that it's been done, and so we know we can do it here too.
And I really believe it's been built on the credibility that we've built through working at the front line. I think both sort of augment each other because we know the issues, we know these gaps, for example, the gaps that I described in the animal health system, because we stand side by side with those paravets that haven't had any support or training since they qualified, or that they only have 2 bottles of antibiotics to treat hundreds of animals. We stand there and we know the issues, and so we can speak with real credibility when we're talking to governments, and even at the UN. We've spoken at the high-level political forum in New York. We're recognised by UN bodies, and so that really adds value. I wouldn't say we'd want to move completely to an advocacy and campaigning organisation, because the work that we do at ground level is so valuable and augments that broader and sustained change in policy that we can bring about.
It's just one piece of the puzzle, right? Yeah. We have a question asking, what about working to include animal welfare issues like those we've been discussing here in educational curriculum, like biology? Would that be can you speak to that?
That's a really good question, because that is something that we have done. There's a fantastic initiative. There will be a page on our website, no doubt, about donkey clubs in Kenya, where young people, whether they own donkeys or not in their family, although most of them do, that care and respect for animals. And we're also launching a program in India that is similar, really integrating it into the school curriculum. It's something that I really try and do with my own kids as well. This, that ingrained respect for animals is just so important, and it should be developed at a young age.
Keep in mind that in most of our communities, I'm thinking of India particularly, and examples I've seen there, is the children are often the animal handlers with their mothers. And it's not unusual for very small 5, 6, 7-year-old children to be doing most of the handling. So they very often are, and the women too, but most of the kids are very, they want to learn, they want to know about these things, and it's quite interesting. I was in India last year with a group in one of the Qualanda communities. These are nomadic communities that breed mules for sale. And an enormous jack mule, he must have been 16 or 17 hands, being handled by a 4-year-old who had him by the halter and was being lifted off the ground every 2 minutes and up and down. But he knew exactly how to look after that animal. He knew exactly. That's a 4-year-old.
And they're amazing advocates for animals as well. In Afghanistan, we have a program where the children conduct a welfare assessment of the animals, because they can move more easily between households than the adults, and they give their animals a sort of a traffic light score, and then go and tell the adults how to improve how they're looking after the animals. So that's a fantastic initiative.
I like that. There is a follow-up question to that, which is, what if, and also could it be included as part of the advocacy efforts in the US and the UK? And I will say for the US, it's still something that we're working on getting off the ground, and it's again, Emily or Catherine, if either of you has anything you want to add in there, please let me know. But I know that that's certainly something we can take as a note for future. But current advocacy efforts in the UK, Clara, any, or future?
I don't believe there's a direct, because we don't sort of work in the UK, it's just in the countries, low and middle income countries. So I don't believe there's an initiative to improve it directly in the UK, but you never know.
And so push for it at home with your own kids, like you're doing. We are going through so many. We've got a lot of great questions here, which is so exciting. So in terms of animal welfare and the donkey hide trade, which we've touched on both of those, can the consumption of e-jow be tied into the effort to mitigate the spread of disease? And is there a connection there?
Well, there's an indirect one. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Claire. I don't think there's much issue over donkeys or donkey hide transmitting disease to anybody. But where there is a connection is there's no known value, medicinal value in e-jow, in donkey hide extract, and that it's only part of a much bigger issue in China particularly, but in other areas of Southeast Asia, where a lot of wild and domestic animal products of one sort are thought to have some sort of medicinal value. The way out one, of course, is ground up rhino horn, and we mentioned pangolin scales earlier on. All of these pretty well, not all, but pretty well all of these have no proven value. So the difficulty with where the connection is with donkey hide extract is that it's part of a much bigger issue over the pressure that's on animal populations generally, producing things which are actually of no value apart from psychological value to human communities.
And the potential biosecurity risk is something that we have raised in our efforts to sort of stem the demand for donkey hides. Yes, there is potential for transboundary animal disease spread. We know that anthrax can spread in skins, and there may be other pathogens as well. So that's sort of something that we've highlighted as a risk, because it is certainly unregulated. There are not vets checking or testing those skins before they're transported across the globe.
Emily is jumping back on only via audio, and this cat picture is fantastic. But she can speak to the advocacy side of things, some of the things that we're working on launching, since that's drawn in a lot of questions. So I'm going to ask her to unmute, and hopefully she can jump on and say a couple things. Emily, you're still muted, so if you hit unmute, you should be able to talk, or maybe not. Okay, well, while we work on that, we have a question about, because it seems as though building alliances with like-minded organizations might be helpful, particularly in terms of advocacy. Is this something Brook is doing? I can jump on quickly about what Brook USA is doing, which is to say, yes, we do this regularly. We are, Emily in particular is frequently meeting with organizations that also work to improve animal welfare or work in the equine world.
Yeah.
And, oh, you're on.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that particular question. I think that if you look at alliances, the best alliance that we can use as an example is Brook USA Brook, right? We are able to work together to get to a common goal with a very synergistic and common mission. But also, if we look in terms of advocacy, as we launch this campaign, which Amanda mentioned, the idea is to partner with other organizations that have a concern for animal welfare, because the issue is so large and so big, especially when it comes to the donkey trade, that we're going to need, as Amanda said earlier, giants behind us. So the whole idea is to partner with similar organizations as ours, and also to activate, and I think that this is key to advocacy in the US, is to activate our constituents, our friends, to help us deliver the message. The reality is, in the US, we need to petition our legislators on issues that are important to us. And as we move forward with this particular program, we will call upon each and every one of you to help us get to our legislators. That's what changes law, and law is what's going to put a ban to the donkey trade issue and to any other issue we pursue. So it's dependent on our constituents. I hope I answered the question, Amanda.
Mm-hmm. You did, and I will say we have a website happening right now that, as in the future, as we build our advocacy program, we'll have more about how you can help. Right now, it is mostly just about the facts of the donkey hide crisis, but it's donkeyhidecrisis.org, and that's where we will be building some of our tools and information when advocacy, as we move forward with that part of the program.
Amanda, let me just jump in on the question of partnerships. Brook, particularly in recent years, has been, I'm talking about the Brook family generally, have been really, really good at creating partnerships, not only with other animal welfare organizations, but also with some of the human agencies, because this is clearly a, everything we're talking about is a human-animal dynamic. But also, Clara, with United Nations agencies. In fact, we're probably one of the few animal charities that has a sort of recognition amongst those agencies, which just shows the confidence in us.
Yes, we work closely. We're recognised, as I said, as by one of the UN agencies, which gives us the ability to speak, organise events at high level, political forum, and also speak at UN events. We have a really close relationship with the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization with the United Nations, and also the World Organization for Animal Health, the OIE, so the equivalent of the WHO for animals. So we work at that level, as well as with other civil society organizations. So we're part of ICFOR, the International Coalition for Animal Welfare, and we also work closely with other horse and donkey charities in the International Coalition for Working Equids. So wherever possible, we work in partnership with others, and to raise a louder voice by working together.
Emily, I believe this will be for you. Nancy would like to know if the advocacy efforts will be at the state and national level both. Emily? All right. Well, Nancy, I know that we are working on still developing it, so I will find out the answer to that for you and let you know. My guess is it will be all encompassing, but I don't want to speak before I'm confident in the answer to that. If anyone else has any questions, it is 1 o'clock. We have taken a full hour, so I would like to be respectful of everyone's time. If you do have a question that you're about to hit send, please do it. Also, feel free to send any questions that maybe come up for you after this that you realize you wanted to ask and didn't. Send them my way, and I can get you an answer from Clara or David, and we will get you all of the information that you could ever want to know. So I would like to thank Clara and David. Do either of you have a kind of final wrap-up thought before I close us out, or?
No, I just thank everybody for joining, and as you say, if you've got any extra questions, if you think of things, let us know.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much to both of you, to Clara and to David, and thank you to everyone who's on the call and listening. As you've heard, it's really important that we all keep working towards better, more effective animal welfare, both for the health of animals and for the health of the world as a whole. So Brook USA, we're addressing the coronavirus pandemic through our COVID-19 Recovery Fund. So you can support this work, and we hope that you will, by visiting brookusa.org. You can make a donation online. You can also learn more about specifically the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund there, and a number of our other projects that we've been working on, including the donkey hide crisis, which we mentioned several times here. So I hope that this brought up some new information for you. I hope that it brings up some questions, because that means that we're sharing information that you want to know more about. And I just want to say thank you so much all for joining us, and enjoy the day. And thank you again to Clara and David for sharing their expertise and their time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Goodbye.
Thank you.